Welcome to the Orthocast. Today I have an amazing guest, Robert Hammond, or John. He's the author of multiple books, he's written screenplays, and he is a convert to the Orthodox faith. And I read his story in this book called Roads Less Traveled. This is an amazing book. It has a bunch of different stories about different people's journeys to Orthodox Christianity. Now, his journey was very interesting, growing up Protestant, lots of spiritual wandering, looking into Buddhism, Hinduism, struggling with drugs, going to jail. We're going to learn about that all in today's interview. Thank you so much for your time, John. I'm glad we could finally have this interview. My first question for you is, what was your upbringing like? What was your first experiences with Christians? How was it growing older? Did you take your faith seriously? What is your story?
So we moved a bunch of places. I was born in Virginia, and then by the time I was pretty young, moved to California, in a little town called Santa Maria, which is on the Central Coast near Santa Barbara, and that's where we grew up. And I went to a church there. My family, as soon as we moved there, I was still I'd say about second grade, third grade, and we went to a church. It was called First Christian Church, and it was a denomination part of what's called the Disciples of Christ, which is considered a mainline denomination.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know really any difference. I got baptized in the church. It was they would say it's called First Christian Church because we practice the church, Christianity like the first Christians. Oh, okay. I had no idea what that meant. We read the Bible, the New Testament. I was actually in the choir, a little bit. And I was a Boy Scout, pretty good kid for the most part. So I grew up like that. Went to school. I did really well in school. Kind of smart, I thought. But we moved around, so I was always trying to get attention from people. So I kind of joked around. And later as I grew up a little bit more, from the past elementary school to junior high, I grew up back in, back in my day, late 60s. This is, crazy times. Which I guess we could say the same thing now.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of stuff in the background of life. In California, there was the hippies, there was Timothy Leary, all this stuff was going on in the background.
Yeah.
And as I was going into high school, I became kind of rebellious, kind of an anti-war, anti-down with the man establishment. Don't trust anyone over 30. And we see that now. It's like those boomers.
Yeah.
Same mindset, continues, the anti-rebellion. So I was kind of like that. But long story short, is I ended up moving around and got into some little bit of trouble here and there, but I ultimately got into we got a lot of new age beliefs. I moved around and kind of didn't really stay stuck with the Christian church, even though I kind of never stopped really believing that God was God, there was a truth, and there was a Jesus Christ. But I sort of started dismissing it somewhat in the sense I wasn't practicing it. Didn't really believe all the details of it. I thought, maybe this is a myth or this is a myth. And there was so many other stories, Hinduism, Buddhism. And so maybe, Buddha's, the same thing, or maybe, Krishna or whoever, these different philosophers and sages, avatars. And so I kind of went through that, but then eventually I said, you know what, my life is getting kind of mixed up. So I joined the Army. My dad was an officer. So I said, okay, nothing else, I can at least do something. If I'm going to die one of these days, maybe I'll do it for my country, fight those, those evil communists, and the Soviets. So that was kind of the mindset at that time. It was like in the 80s. It was like the Reagan, was the president. So he was like our boss. So we were like, okay, fight these wars and go down to, we were I wasn't doing all this myself, but it was a time where we were totally at peace, but there was these things down in South and Central America, a lot of this, the Contra stuff and a lot of the Grenadas, and then Nicaragua's, El Salvador, stuff over the Middle East as well. And I was behind the scenes. I wasn't like a person out there, fighting, these things, but I knew about them. There was a lot more that was going on than people knew about. I got, so that was and I actually even went to church a couple times in the military, just actually more to get out of having to do other stuff. We got church. But I was, still kind of a rebellious guy. I was in the military. I did, my duty, but, it was a lot of stress. I ended up getting married there. I was drinking a lot. We just kind of partied a lot. Got into a lot of other things. By the time I ended up getting out, I was kind of like a mental, emotional mess in some ways, even physically. I had some injuries.
Wow.
Not, nothing, huge, it wasn't
Yeah.
like a big battle scar that I hadn't thought of, but it was just, got really heavily into drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up splitting up with my wife at the time. We
Mm-hmm.
ended up actually having one child. Um,
Wow.
but it was, that was my beginnings. So
Yeah.
that kind of put me in another realm of just starting to kind of go downhill. And
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
where I ended up, after a while, started getting in trouble with the law. I kind of was just very unstable. It was like I didn't know what to believe. And, just go from one girlfriend to another girlfriend. I'd moved to different cities. I lived up in, Seattle, and had been in Colorado, and I was in LA, and,
Wow.
just kind of traveling and just
Yeah.
like almost escape out of one place, into another one, out of one frying pan into a fire. And it was kind of my life
Yeah.
for a long time. And so I'll shift. That's my background, so to speak.
Yeah.
Before I got to Orthodoxy, I was just a mess.
Yeah, you were just a wanderer, it sounds like, in many ways. Like you were spiritually wandering, you were wondering, what's, the point of your life, getting into drugs and, other problems. So when was like the part where you realized like I need to like change and like get better from this? Because a lot of people, they hit some sort of like spiritual rock bottom or some sort of rock bottom. So when did it start to like change? Was it when you found
Yeah.
Orthodoxy, or I know you started to get more into Christianity again?
Yeah, that was when I can look back, how we can look back and say hindsight's 2020. I can see the path
Yeah,
now. But at
yeah,
the time I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, and
yeah.
I would just like be bouncing around, and I ended up getting in trouble. I was like, became like a hardcore drug addict at one point. I was that bad. I was just like trying to cover up this pain, and
Yeah.
had, girlfriends and relationships, and I was starting to steal and lie and cheat,
Wow.
sell drugs. I ended up going to jail. My
Yeah.
wife had left me at the time. I was just like miserable. And I was physically sick, mentally, physically.
Yeah.
And so that's one of my, you say bottoms, where I kind of hit, where I was just like, waking up, and, felt like everybody kind of turned against me, because obviously I'd been such a terrible, person myself. So it wasn't like they were the bad people. I knew I was.
Yeah.
And I got into, I picked up a Bible at that time. I was in a county jail,
Wow.
and didn't know what was going to happen. And I remember I just picked it up. They give you these Gideon Bibles, and
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of people that would kind of use that as a way to try to get out and say, "Oh, I'm a Christian now." And those
Yeah.
Bible studies all over the jails and stuff. But most people weren't into it. But I just read it. I was like, okay, let me just read this thing for a change. And I literally just had this kind of enlightened time, in the sense that I could actually I read it, look from cover to cover. I mean, I talked about Old
Wow.
Testament, New Testament.
Wow.
I read a couple different, New International Version, King James. They got like Living Bible. I read it, and I just got really into it. I was like, whoa, this is actually true.
Yeah.
Like I said, I never really
Yeah.
read the whole thing. I just, heard a few verses here and there, and knew this little story of David and Goliath, and
Yeah.
Noah's Ark. And so
Mm-hmm.
that happened, and that was kind of shifted my perspective to believing, that this is more than just a story, more than just a belief system. Even though my life was still very, fragile,
Mm-hmm.
but I became kind of like this quote evangelical, born again, Christian.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, now what do I do? I got to get out. And I tried to get back with my wife, which I did. That's when, she ended up, getting pregnant, having their son
Wow.
during that period of time. But my life was still such a mess.
Yeah.
I was trying to pick up the pieces. I didn't know what to do. I got different jobs. And then and we ended up splitting up. Then I just kind of started falling back into my lifestyle. I was drinking and going out and meeting other girls, and just, even though I was a Christian, but I got disillusioned, because it was during that time where I didn't really know, as a Christian, where do I go to church? What do I do about it? I went, and there was it was like the time of all these TV evangelists, which I guess it's still a time now, but
Yeah.
was like, oh, I'll listen to this guy,
Oh
Hal
no.
Lindsey, or the Jimmy Swagger. And
Yeah.
because I didn't know who was who, and I was like, oh, they're like telling you to speak in tongues, and one person's telling you that Jesus is
Oh
going to come on
no.
this date. And I'm like, oh, really? And oh, we got to fight, for Israel. And there's so many
Yeah.
different versions of it. I was like, I got very excited at certain times, but then I was like, wait a minute, that's saying the opposite of what the other people were saying. And so that was very confusing. And then it was like all these scandals started breaking out. you know,
Yeah.
these big time, you know, which I guess that still happens now.
Mm-hmm.
People, they would find out they were total frauds, or they were like sleeping with prostitutes. And these are like these big, you know, pastors and preachers. And I was like, oh, you know, now I don't even know if I should believe any of
Yeah.
these people, because they're not doing what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, again, I started going back downhill, up and down. And that was where I started losing, you know, a lot of my faith to some extent. And again, drugs, I just kept going back and forth.
Yeah.
You know, eventually I did, excuse me, struggle to try to get out of it. And I went
Mm-hmm.
to, you know, I got, you know, I was working. And actually, that was a time when the crazy part, after my credit and everything was so messed up after, you know, going through the divorce and all this drug
Mm-hmm.
jail stuff. I was like, man, I can't even rent an apartment. You know, my credit and everything was so bad. And this
Wow.
will get into how I ended up writing books.
Yeah.
Is that I couldn't even open, my credit was so bad, I couldn't even open a savings account, literally.
Wow.
I mean, I'd go in there with like $100 cash, and they'd look up my name. I was like, oh, no, you can't. You got to go somewhere else. We can't. You know, I
Wow.
had all these, you know, bad checks and all this stuff on the systems.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't even like rent an apartment, you know, because they run these background checks. So I
Yeah.
was like, okay, now what am I going to do? I'm all here by myself. I got a little bit of a job. I'd actually got a government job, believe it or not,
Wow.
with the I was an employment counselor with the county of
Oh.
Riverside, Southern California.
Oh, okay.
Worked for the Welfare to Work program. So,
Yeah.
you know, and I did a decent job doing it, but I was, you know, again, I had all these struggles going on inside. And so that's how I learned during that time. It's like, okay, I can't even, you know, function in society without, you know, at least having a bank account
Mm-hmm.
and a checking account so I can get my checks and actually put them in the bank versus going to a check cashing place
Yeah.
or having, hey, can you cash this check for me? And I mean, that was how bad I was.
Yeah.
So I I found, and this is back in the day, you know, I know most younger people like yourself, they don't know this time frame,
Mm-hmm.
but we actually had a time where we didn't have like an internet. We didn't have like cell phones.
Yeah.
And it's like when you went to look up information,
Yeah.
you have to go to these places called libraries.
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
they're like books. And we're like,
Yeah.
oh, you got to read these books.
Wow.
I got to actually meet people and talk to them.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't just like look up a subject and go find out everything
Yeah.
about it in 5 minutes. You'd have
Uh-huh.
to go get one book, go to get another book.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were hard to find. You
Yeah.
know, you couldn't even, all this information. I went to find out, how do I fix my credit? And I went to the library, and there was like really nothing on that topic. It was like, okay, you could file bankruptcy,
Mm-hmm.
or you could budget your money. I'm like, well, no, I don't need quite those right now. I need
Yeah.
something so I can get a credit check approved so I can get a bank account.
Yeah.
And so I met a person who used to work for, he was like a top security guy for one of these credit bureaus. It was called TRW.
Yeah.
And, you know, he was a high level military security person, and him and this other guy who was an attorney, bankruptcy attorney. And I met with them, and they actually taught me, you know what, there's ways you can kind of get around some of the stuff. You can kind of clear up these things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, whoa. And I learned how to, quote, fix credit. You know, it's like,
Wow.
I was one of the first people who started really doing that. And I'm like, oh, I got that off my record. Okay, now I can go get this. I got a bank account. Oh, I got a credit card.
Yeah.
And I remember telling people at work, you know, it's like, they're like, hey, how'd you do that? And I go, well, you do this and then you do this. And
Yeah.
And so many people kept asking me the same questions over and over. I go, here, let me just write this down. I don't want to keep saying the same
Yeah.
thing. So first you get your credit report, then you do this, then you do this. And here's how you can do it one
Wow.
way. Here's another way you can kind of start over. You can kind of get a blank slate. You can add positive stuff on there. And all, you know, some things legal, some are kind of like,
Yeah.
a little shady.
Yeah.
That was just, you know, stuff I learned. I go, well, some people do it this way. I'm not telling you to do it, but that's
Yeah.
a way around the
Uh-huh.
system.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of what happened. And I actually ended up, I had these read these underground books, because some stuff you couldn't buy in a bookstore in the library. You'd actually have to order them, you know, these
Mhm.
like underground, you know, new identities, and you had to, you know, commit all these, you know, manufacture bombs and weapons. I mean, these are these anarchist cookbook types of catalog.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you've ever heard of those.
Yeah, a little bit.
But yeah, that
Yeah.
was, you know, stuff that was going on. I mean, there's still now. I mean, you can pretty much just get anything on the internet, but we didn't have that then. So it actually got one of these catalogs that was called Paladin Press, and they were, you know, like these mercenaries basically who started this thing to show you how to, you know, kind of fight in jungles, how to do, you know, all this
Wow.
crazy overseas stuff. And I was a military guy, so I liked it.
Yeah.
Just, stuff about weapons and guns and identities, spy stuff.
Hmm.
And so one day I was reading a catalog and said, "Oh, we got a contest. We're looking for how to beat the system, manuscripts." And I was like, "Oh, I wrote all this stuff down about this credit. I think it's not really a book or anything, but let me just send it to them." And I literally had we had these things called typewriters on paper.
Yeah.
Literally,
Wow.
like paper that you print out.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a little typewriter, and I stapled it in the corner and I mailed it to them. Kind of forgot about it, and it was like how to erase bad credit.
Yeah.
And then, I wasn't thinking about it. And then one day I got a letter in the mail, and it was like, "Congratulations, you won our manuscript contest. We offer
Wow.
you $1,000 and a publishing contract." I'm like, "What?" And so
Wow.
we worked with them, and I did some revisions, and so that became my first book.
Yeah.
It was called Credit Secrets,
Hmm.
and that was a long, long time ago. But they had me on, got like on radio and TV, and
Yeah.
did all these interviews. And then I wrote another book on the same subject. I started fighting the credit bureaus because
Mm.
I found out that they were doing all this kind of shady stuff. These big,
Yeah.
corporations, they were like giving people bad credit so that they could make your credit worse.
Hmm.
And then that way their report would be more valuable because look, we found all this stuff on this person. Or,
Wow.
sometimes they just make a mistake, your stuff would be messed up. So that's how I became kind of the credit doctor. And I
Yeah.
got on, wrote books on credit, debt, finance, all these things for a few years off and on,
Yeah.
even though I was still having all these internal struggles,
Hmm.
because I was kind of like thinking I'm Mr. So-and-so, I was on the Phil Donahue show, that's
Hmm.
like around the time of Oprah Winfrey. I wasn't on her show, but they
Oh,
called me, they
wow.
wanted me on, and I didn't get on there. But,
Oh.
I was like on like hundreds of radio, TV interviews and, traveled, they would send me around the country. And then I got hired by Capital One
Yeah.
because they wanted me to write a book on identity theft.
Wow.
And so I did that. And so I wrote like one of the first books on that topic, and, became like their spokesperson for Capital One. And
Really?
meanwhile,
Wow.
I'm still kind of internally a totally, you know, mixed up guy because I kind of didn't have any real roots. I was kind of going from one girlfriend to another. I
Yeah.
kind of had these different self-help philosophies, and
Hmm.
I'd been in and out of like the 12-step groups a little bit,
Hmm.
AA and NA and all those things. But, for the most part, I was just kind of just doing my own thing. And I would try different, positive thinking, visualization, and, these
Yeah.
Buddhist chants and this or that, whatever
Hmm.
would help me
Yeah.
to succeed or to survive, basically. Because half the time I was just totally, in these, I mean, there was times I was like doing these interviews on the radio and on, even on television. I was like in New York, they would send me there and I'd have all these
Wow.
narcotics with me. This was
Oh
before
my.
9/11, so you could actually just take them with you on the plane with you. I could have a gun and a bunch
Yeah.
of drugs in
Yeah.
my pockets,
Wow.
basically, and walk into, on airplanes, and I'd go to these places. And there'd be times I'd be on doing an interview on TV, and I'd be stoned out of my mind. I'd be like totally, but I
Yeah.
maintain nobody would, supposedly, they didn't know.
Yeah,
It was,
that's really interesting. I think it's helping me to understand kind of the progression. And I think there's something really important, like financial literacy is such a bad problem in America, and especially
oh,
when there's not as many resources back then. Luckily, now that there's YouTube, you're able, like financial literacy, the younger generations are able to learn. But that's really cool that you were kind of like a pioneer in that, credit, like, getting your credit under control. And it sounds like it was kind of like really important part of your journey for like self improvement. If you saw that you were in this hole, and then you were able to get out, and then you're also able to like help, other people despite your
mhm.
your own struggles. And even though you're giving this like great advice, you're still struggling inside. And then
Yes, physician, heal thyself.
yeah, 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 exactly. And I remember in your book you said you're starting to get into more like mystical things like Buddhism, and like just kind of like staying still. And then that's kind of what eventually, when you start to hear like an Orthodox perspective online, it kind of clicked. Is that kind of what happened?
Yeah,
Yeah.
eventually, that is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
2016
Mm-hmm.
was a huge year for me, and just backing up slightly before that time
Yeah.
frame, I had by the time all this other stuff was going down, I ended up I was working for the government. I was doing all these books. I was traveling, Mr. Big Shot, etc.
Yeah.
But because I had all these struggles, I ended up, I got in trouble again. By this time, I had a record. I had a gun out. I was carrying a gun. I had all this drugs in my car. I got pulled over one day. And I'd been like kind of a born again Christian at the same time. I remember going like the day before to one of these Harvest Crusades, Great Glory, these big things down in Southern California. It was like 4th of July, fireworks going ahead, and everybody come down. It's kind of like a Billy Graham, for younger age people, and which I was at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember being like that, but then I was living with some girl and smoking pot and taking drugs, and I was on methadone and.
Wow.
The next day, and I'm still working and still, Mr. Writer, but I get pulled over and I got all this drugs in my car. I got a gun, 2 guns, I think, or 1.
Wow.
But anyway, long story short, I ended up in prison.
Yeah.
And, I'm on my way to state prison by this time because, you've got a record, you've got all these priors. And I was like, okay, so that was my sobriety date, October 31st, 1997. And that was like where, I just totally was my final, I'll say final, but my last hitting bottom after everything else was there. And then that was when I just really had to scrape my way back up. And even, get back reading the Bible, but I was like, okay, this is just not enough just to read this book. I believed in it still, but I was like, okay, this did, I was going to church all before that. And I'd go to they have churches in the prisons and stuff. And there'd be times I'll read this, and be like the guy leading the service. I knew about the Bible, but I didn't know, how to live my life. I just said, okay, here's what I found. This verse says this, and blah blah blah.
Wow.
But I wasn't a person who knew enough would be in that position. But I was kind of like one of the guys who would lead the Bible studies and stuff.
Yeah.
But so finally, by the time I got out of there, God, it was like so long ago. It took me a while to get myself reestablished, but I stayed sober. I got back. I was going like the 12-step groups, and that was helpful. I don't know if you know a lot about those, but they basically have a somewhat of a Christian background. It's like you admit your problems, you believe there's a higher power, God, and then you surrender, your life to God, and then you write out, your issues. And that helped me too because I was a writer, so I was the type I'd be in a place where they say, write out all your, your quote inventory, and I did that, and that made me kind of create like a memoir of story. I was like, okay, here I remember going through this. And it's like a therapeutic thing, just like when you write your story, and that's one of the things advice. Just like when I wrote my credit books, they were semi-autobiographical because I would say how my credit was so bad I couldn't even start a bank account. But then I learned and these are like true stories. Now tell them I learned how to do this, and this is how I did it. And so I'd integrate, personal experience with knowledge that I would find and discover, and then I did this, and this really worked, and blah blah blah. And then I realized, going through the credit things, like, I got all these credit cards, but now I'm in debt. So I'm like, okay, what do I got to deal with that now? Debt, debt is slavery, which is like you're in the borrower as a servant to the lender. So I learned kind of to go through the other side of not just getting a bunch of credit, not wiping out your records, but it's like, okay, you got to manage this.
Yes.
Your finances. You got to like lower your expenses, pay off your bill. Don't get yourself in debt because you become a slave. Whole usury interest things. That's why it's such a sin, because the people become slaves to, these money lenders, literally.
Yes.
So that was a big part of my life, was dealing with that, and I still, still an issue because I have, bought a house, we have cars, we have things that we still pay off. Yeah. But I learned that you don't want to just be swamped where you can't afford what you're living, so just because you can put it on a credit card.
Yeah. Exactly.
But back to fast forwarding to finding the church. By this time, I was married again, had who I still have, a wonderful wife, and we were living up in the Bay Area. I was living before in Southern California, so I ended up meeting women, and I ended up transferring my job. I'd worked for the state of California by this time. And so I was able to transfer as a manager to an office in the Bay Area. We got together, got married, And I remember just, having a really good life. I'd been sober for, like over like 10 years,
Wow.
so I stopped using drugs and alcohol all of this time. And, I was but kind of semi-evangelical again,
Mm.
go to these mega church kinds of places.
Hmm.
And, you know, it was something, but I knew it wasn't totally fulfilling, but it was like, okay, I believe the main things that they're saying,
Yeah.
that Jesus is, the Lord, and,
Hmm.
believe in him and all that. But a lot of it was kind of that, different versions of it, and
Hmm.
that was still kind of, and then every so often you get these ends of time
Yeah.
people, hey,
Yeah.
this is the last, and it'd be like billboards that Jesus is going to come on May 21st,
Yeah.
2011.
Uh-huh.
I was like, oh man, what do I believe now? I still think there's some basic truth. So I got to a point where I had just, I got so sick of these different versions of Christianity
Hmm.
that, we moved again. We were still in the Bay Area. I was like, you know what, I'm done going to church. I just, I'm tired of these people saying, it's quote organized religion, and these people just making up
Yeah.
stuff and
Hmm.
changing, totally opposite versions of the same book. It's like, okay, Bible, maybe it's true, but how can one person say it means one thing and someone
Hmm.
else says it means something totally
Yeah.
opposite?
Hmm.
And so I just said, what, I'm just not going to go, to these things. And so I went for like about 5 years, from like 2011. That was the time. 'Cause I remember that was like the world's supposed to end that year.
Yeah.
Okay, it didn't
Yeah.
end. So let me start over and just quit going and just read the Bible on my own. Just sit and kind of. I got into like more of a mysticism.
Hmm.
It's kind of like, okay, let me just meditate and let God speak to me. And I didn't really do anything about it other than just kind of would read some books about it. And that's where within about 5 years of that, I was like, oh, it's still missing, just being by myself. And even though I was married, I remember we went to like a Greek festival one time just
Yeah.
for fun. I had no
Uh-huh.
idea what, it really was. I said, oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
good food. Oh, look at that dancing. Oh, let's buy some souvenirs, and
Hmm.
eat some baklava, and, bought some carved, things, gifts
Yeah.
or whatever out of olive trees or whatever. And I was like, oh, these, that's some religion or something. And I remember, because I was so into my mystical Christianity, I
Hmm.
remember having this little pamphlet that I'd read sometimes. It was, I forget what it's called, but like Inner Christianity or something, Inner Light Peace or
Hmm.
whatever. And I remember having that. And when they, give you like a tour in the Greek festival,
Yeah, the
I
church.
walk through the bookstore and I go, oh, these people, they're so, stuck in these religions. In my mind, here,
Yeah.
I'm gonna just set this little thing down here, this little pamphlet of mine.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting it down in there and thinking, oh, maybe someone will read that and then they'll get it, And it's like, oh, I don't need.
Wow.
That was my
Y-
arrogance. I'm so,
Yeah.
ashamed when I remember doing that. I literally put that into a Greek Orthodox church bookstore, a little
Wow.
her- heretical. I mean, it had Bible verses in it, but it was just twisted to the point where it's like, you don't need religion, just believe and
Yeah.
that type of thing. I was like, anyway, 2016, if you remember that year, it was a very crazy year,
Yes, it
like all
was.
the politics
Uh-huh.
stuff was going on. And I was like, yeah. And I had been quit going to church for that time. And then I was like, I would start reading and listening to some things online,
Mhm.
YouTube. And, and I remember I had kind of quit working. I taught, college for a while as a professor,
Oh wow.
writing, and I had semi-retired from my job. And I had these big Hollywood projects in the works too, because I was writing screenplays. I had gotten a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I was a screenwriting professor.
Wow.
And so I had these big projects in the works. I'd done, I think you mentioned earlier, I'd done like a documentary on
Yeah.
Bohemian
Mhm.
Grove, which is this crazy Illuminati place. I'd
Yeah.
gone up there,
Yeah.
it was like, all these Alex Jones and all Mike Dice, all these guys. And I got, I was like, I knew about a lot of conspiracy things before, but just it kind of got back into them. I was like, oh wow, I realized there was a lot of stuff going on that I hadn't been really thinking about, because
Yeah.
even though I'd done the credit books, I knew there was a lot of people behind the scenes
Yeah.
doing some kind of shady financial stuff, with the world banking systems and that stuff. But I wasn't like really, into it or anything. I just like knew that was a thing, and there was a
Hmm.
lot of stuff that we just didn't know about.
Yeah.
A lot of manipulation.
Hmm.
And so anyway, that's kind of where I was at that point. And so 2016, I remember my wife and I, we went skydiving,
Yeah.
which was like a big, Child's. My dad was like in the 82nd Airborne, and he did it when he was like
Oh,
82 years old. He dived out of an airplane. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And I
wow.
didn't really want to do it. It wasn't like, oh, I really want to do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, really. But my wife had wanted to, and so it was like our 7th anniversary. And I was like, okay, let's just do it. Just to have something that we've done that's really crazy and wild. Went to Monterey. It was like 18,000 feet over the bay, and just did it. And it was just like, whoa, it's just a total, like literal leap of faith.
Yeah, it is.
It's the craziest thing because you're like risking your life. You got to sit there for the half of the day and signing all these things. Say, if I die, it's my fault.
Yeah.
If I die, it's not your fault. It's like, I'm willing to die. I don't care if I die. These liability waivers.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yeah, well, you never know what's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like like that leap when you jump out of that plane, when you're finally doing it, you're floating. And it was like, you don't feel like you're falling, like, how an elevator goes down really fast. It wasn't that. It's just like you're literally floating in the air. And it was like,
Wow.
oh. And I remember that experience, and you kind of like tumbling over, and you see the bay down below.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was kind of like a letting go. It's like, okay, I'm in God's hands. I don't really have control over my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was not long after that. I don't remember the exact time frame, but I know that was 2016.
Yeah.
I remember soon after that, I was like still thinking, okay, I'm still like sitting here, read the Bible every now and then, and I'll pray and just kind of listen for God to speak to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, there's got to be more to that. There's got to be, when I read the Bible, I see there are people that are gathering.
Yeah.
Where do we gather? There's people are going out and doing these missionary works. There's healings and there's preachings and there's all this stuff. And I go, well, I don't really want to go to these mega churches because they're not really saying what I think the Bible is saying. And but I still feel like I should be connected somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I just remember still looking at the mystical. I said, what's the early Christianity? And I remember the church I'd gone to originally was called First Christian Church. I go, no, that's probably not the first Christian. I learned that was actually, there was like a spin-off of the Presbyterians, like in 1800s. They say, no, we're going to shift off and split off to become, our own thing. I was like, okay, well, there's all these splits, these thousands of denominations and different cults. And I'm like, okay, so are you saying that the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, the Pentecostals, the Baptists, they're all saying the same thing? No, they're not. It's not the same. It's totally, many of them are totally the opposite. So I was like, there's got to be something that's true, that's still true, that doesn't matter what I believe about it or who's saying it. It's like, this is, the ultimate truth. And so that's where I kind of stumbled on, I was looking at early Christianity, mysticism. There was a guy, Ted Nottingham, who actually was a pastor from that first Christian church, but he had then converted to Orthodoxy, which I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
But he mentioned it just in passing. He says, there's an early Christianity that has the symbolism that's real in the presence of God. And I'm like, whoa, really?
Yeah.
And I see these pictures of these people bowing down and all this incense. I was like, wow, that's different. I remember my churches didn't do that. But then I remember seeing a couple things that I had heard of it, because he mentioned the Desert Fathers. I go, oh yeah, I remember hearing about those Desert Fathers. I don't remember what they were, but I just knew I'd heard of them.
Yeah.
And I remember they mentioned Mount Athos. I go, oh yeah, I think I saw something on 60 Minutes about Mount Athos. And so all the stuff was coming together. And I was like, oh, the Jesus prayer. Oh yeah, I think I heard of that. Because I used to think, as all these New Age things, they say I got to have a good mantra, something that, some spiritual thing to say over and over. And I never could find a good one, because there were all these different weird ones.
Yeah.
But then I was like, oh, it's kind of like a mantra, but it goes, no, it's not really that. It's just, this is you bowing down to Christ and seeking His mercy. And the mercy is not just don't kill me, God, but it's like, this is like the honey of God, the love of Him coming down. Like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so all that stuff started hitting me. And I was like, wow, this Orthodox church. I wonder if there's any Orthodox churches near me. Let me look at my computer. I'm in the Bay Area. So I was like, okay, Orthodox church.
Yeah.
It was like, I'm like, whoa, I had never even heard of them before. Didn't know much about them. Didn't really even realize I'd ever even been to one or been inside of one.
Yeah.
So I started seeing that, wow, they're all over the place. And so I started just kind of looking around, and I started contacting people. There's a couple people online that had like those Journey to Orthodoxy website that would
Mm-hmm.
tell you about Orthodoxy. And I talked to the priest there at some point, and he says, well, there's some churches in your area, you can go here and look for some different ones. I met with a couple of different places. I remember walking into this one Greek Orthodox church up in the Bay Area, and the priest had introduced me to the church, and he said, okay, here's, we'll walk in, I'll just show you how it looks. And I remember walking in and seeing that dome and all those pictures, and I literally just like wept. I was just like, oh.
Yeah.
I mean, it just wiped me out. I was like, I couldn't even talk.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And so I knew there was something more than just, the rhetoric and these TED Talk and rock cards are kind of versions of Christianity, which is kind of what I had been doing for so long, or just reading and intellectualizing and debating, Calvinist versus Arminianist, and, these different, points of predestination and all that kind of stuff. There was more to it than just trying to argue over these little technical terms. It was like a living way, and it wasn't just about be a good person, because all people were trying to say, yeah, you can be a good person doing this or that, but it's like changing, from death to life, living in Christ. I was like, whoa, this is the real presence. I was like, oh wow. And so that's how I started seeing it. And then I remember just started to visit some of these different churches, and I only said, one of the people said, here's, there's all these different ones, so it's like, I don't even know where to start, because I'm, I'm American, and, I, speak English. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but I'm not like into, like Serbian and Romanian and Greek. And I don't have any background in those, I'm, African American, but I'm not like, I don't want to just go to some, black, Pentecostal church, which I have been to many of those too, or Baptist, which I kind of grew up with a lot of versions of that as well. I was like, I don't want it to, my experience to be just based on that. I don't really, I'm not against, different groups of people, because I like them, even though as in the military, we were like, those Russians are the evil Soviet.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I better not go to a Russian church because they'll think I'm a spy or something. I remember thinking that. But then they said, someone said, here's this Greek cathedral not far from you, and the priest there has been like there for 30 years. He's very well respected, very well, received, educated, and so many people from different places. I mean, there were people from all backgrounds that would go there. And so I was like, oh, okay. I went there. It was called Disillusioned Cathedral. It's in Oakland. And it was this really beautiful place. And there was, I met with a priest, and, when the assistant priest was, I think, like an Assyrian, and he spoke Aramaic, and
wow.
I got a godfather from Greece, and, and I just learned, I didn't learn Greek, but I felt part of it, because there were so many people that, there was obviously people who were Greek, say about a third or more, but there's people from Ethiopia, there were Russian people who came there, there was, just all kinds of Americans and other Spanish, Mexican, that would go to this one Orthodox church. I was like, oh, okay. And so I ended up eventually getting baptized at that church.
Wow.
With my godfather in the Greek Orthodox Church. And I remember at some point during that time, I think before that, I was, and my wife had come with me a few times, even though she didn't like totally convert, but she would come and she'd be supportive of it and she'd like it. And then I was saying, oh, we should go to one of those Greek festivals. Remember that time we went to that Greek festival years ago? And I was like, where was that, by the way? I kind of vaguely remember. She goes, that's the church you're going to now. I'm like, what?
Wow, that's crazy.
I had no idea. I thought it was like in some other town somewhere. It's like, no, this is where the church that we went to that one time when you put your pamphlet out and thought you're going to show them.
Yeah.
Apparently they're praying for everybody who walks on the property, because I was one of those people who thought I knew what I was doing, and little did I know. And so I got baptized there in the Orthodox Church. And then what was crazy is like, okay, well, here we are. I'm living in Walnut Creek, Bay Area. I'm going to go to this church, and now I'm feeling pretty good about it. So, settled.
Yeah.
Even though I had, kind of quit working, I thought I still had these big Hollywood projects in the works, these screenplays, and some producers who wanted me to do these other projects. I'd done the documentary. I'd done a bunch of other films too. I'd done about 10 short films and then, some other productions. So I thought, and I'd written, by this time about a dozen books too.
Wow.
I was teaching creative writing, so I was like, okay, I'm pretty sad. I don't really need to work, but our finances were starting to go back down again.
Mm-hmm.
We'd gone from, we had like this big 6-figure income living in a pretty decent area. We'd sold our properties. We were just going to buy another house somewhere. But then it was like, okay, it's not working out. But I was still going to church, and I'd gotten baptized. And it was like 4 days after that baptism when I actually got a job interview.
Mm-hmm.
Because I started thinking, oh, you know what, I'm going to have to go back to work. It's like, oh, I don't really want to do that. But I got to do it. I can't just think all the stuff's going to fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got the job interview, and I got the job in Sacramento.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, I don't want to commute, 70 miles from the Bay Area out here every day for work. But it was a really good job. I really liked it. I was working for veterans. I was an Army veteran.
Yeah.
And I was helping, veterans. And I did some writing and developing some training, videos and stuff like that. And so that job ended up making me say, okay, my wife and I was like, okay, maybe we should move out that way. I'm like, move, Sacramento.
Yeah.
And I did. And I got, but it was like it fell into place. I mean, we literally just bought a house, put one offer on the house, and bought the house.
Wow.
We fixed it up, lived there for a couple of years. Then again, it was like, oh, I wonder if there's any Orthodox churches near me. Now I'm in Sacramento.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, a lot of them again.
Yeah.
So I bounced around, with many of them. there was one right down the street from where I worked.
Mm-hmm.
I literally could walk there, and that's the Russian Orthodox Church, Ascension, Holy Ascension.
Yeah.
Which is the church I ended up now going to.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
With Father Paul.
Yeah.
And I've been, and I went to many other churches here too. I mean, it's beautiful OCA church, Salvation Holy Cross, which I actually lived near there, so I would go there for quite a while. And I've been visiting the Serbian church, the Fire, the sacrament, the Holy Sacrament, the Blessed Sacrament.
Yes.
Which I didn't think about.
Yeah.
But it's like this. We have 14 Orthodox churches here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's monasteries. Father Sarah from Rose was up north.
Yeah.
There's
Saint John Maximovich and
the saint.
Yeah.
We've got
Saint Sebastian and Jackson.
Jackson.
Yeah.
So it's like like we're right in the center of all this.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that's where I am now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just
so
beautifully.
So going to all these different Orthodox churches, how was your experience? Because some people do have some anxieties. There's a perception of ethnic Orthodoxy, and there are some more ethnic parishes. But how was your experience? When you first went versus going to all these different churches, like. Do you feel like they're, welcoming, or how has your experiences been?
Yeah, they actually are. And I was very hesitant at first. I was kind of, had the anxiety, the anticipatory anxiety. It's like, oh, I don't want to walk in someplace and nobody speaks English.
Yeah.
Or everybody's all, from Bulgaria or someplace. I don't even know where it is on the map. And then when I went to the first church that I really started going to, there was a Greek cathedral. There was like people who it didn't matter. I mean, people would come to me, and in fact, one of the first persons that talked to me, she was Russian, and her family was Russian, but she was going to the Greek church. She just liked that particular church.
Yeah.
And a few other people were the same thing. They were actually from other ethnic groups. And then I met my godfather, who was very just one of these really gregarious, really friendly people. And I didn't know he was going to be my godfather at the time. He was just like one of those people I'd always talk to. And hey, let me introduce you to the so-and-so. And we'd talk, and he'd introduce me to all these people. And I was like, oh. And now, we had these, those coffee hours. And it was a really big place. There was so many people there, and they were all very, very friendly. And I really loved being there. And I expected that's where I was going to stay until, like I said, the job offer came, just a few months after I started going there. And I got baptized in December 3rd. And it was like 4 days later, the 7th, that I got the job interview and the job in Sacramento. And so I was like, whoa, okay. So then we moved out there, a couple of months after that, out here, which is where I am now. And then we've moved to another house since then. But so now I'm retired.
Yeah.
But back to the question of the different churches. And so that's the thing. I've been to so many different ones. And I spent a lot of my time in the Russian Orthodox Church. which to me was like what I thought I would never really want to go to. Just
Yeah.
given, I grew up in the Cold War.
Yeah.
I thought those communists. But then I realized I learned the history of Russia. I actually
Yeah.
learned some Russian language,
Wow.
and I started going there. And I mean, everybody was always really friendly too. So I'm not even thinking about, where people are from. But we have people, so many converts actually go there.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like about that particular one is because they're so strong into the tradition. And I learned like the Saint Vladimir, Prince, who baptized Holy Russia in 988 AD. I was like, wow, and so how he, these pagan, tribal Vikings basically,
Yeah.
were out there killing each other and doing human sacrifices and all these pagan gods, and they fighting each other until he said, hey, we got to unite with something. And then he sent people out to Jerusalem and to Islam and all these places to say, here, come back and tell us what the religions are. And they told, oh, well, these Muslims, they're really strong, but they don't like drink, and they're very not that happy.
Wow.
And the Jews, we went to theirs, but they didn't even have a country, so we're like, they're not going to win any battles.
Wow.
And then we went to this, they went to Hagia Sophia,
Yeah.
the cathedral there in Constantinople, and we said we didn't know if we were in heaven or on earth.
Wow.
And so that was what convinced him, and then he became married to the princess of Constantinople and converted, was baptized. This is Prince Vladimir.
Yeah.
And then all Russia became part of that Christian, holy Rus.
Wow.
And so that to me was a very interesting, that background, that story, and just seeing even when they went to communism, during the Bolshevik revolutions, that they stood up for their faith and they had these martyrs. And I saw the same thing, with the Greeks. They had been attacked, by the Turks and under slavery, and I saw so many people, the Serbs, Battle of Kosovo. I've heard so many of these such moving stories that we don't really hear as much in like in the Protestant world. It's like, okay, yeah, there's martyrs still, Protestant missionaries that get killed, jungles and stuff. So it's not to take away from that, but I saw these full cultures, and so back to my connection with it. It really just transcends that. It's not about oh, what race is this person, or what what's their ethnicity. It's like, this is Christ, this is the body of Christ. We're all in it. We're all in this one place. And so I felt very free going to, I go to we have a Romanian church here I've been to. We have Greek Orthodox, we've got Serbian, we've got OCA, which is Orthodox Church in America, very much more based on almost all converts, mostly. And so I enjoy just having those choices, actually, because I know I hear these stories of people who live out in the middle of say like Wyoming or some states or some countries even where there's not a church even near them, and they have to go to just one church they can find. It's like hours and hours away. And so we're kind of spoiled here, especially Northern California, and I'm sure there's other places like this where there are a lot of choices. And I just go where God's has led me to go, and close to where I live. And it doesn't matter to me if it's the ethnic group where it started was in Serbia, Russia, Romania, Greece. It's we're all one.
Exactly.
Very comfortable everywhere I go.
Yeah, perfectly said. And one question I wanted to ask earlier is, going into the church for the first time, you saw it was like so beautiful and it made you weep. But then when you started going to the liturgy, and was there any like stumbling blocks or anything? Or was it like when you first started going, it's like, I'm home, and like now it's time to like just learn, or did you have any like problems with anything?
I didn't have, by the time I started coming, I didn't have problems. I mean, it took me a little while just from my mindset changing, having what they call it Orthodox mindset, worldview, phronema, and certain things that I had never thought about doing, like like venerating an icon or relics. What I was like totally. I remember somebody, as I was learning about it, they said, "Oh yeah, you should go to the cathedral in San Francisco to venerate the relics of Saint John." I go, I don't know what that means. And they would, say, oh, it means, oh, you mean the body of this person's there? And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. I mean, it was, foreign. I didn't
Yeah.
know anything about it. And I remember
Yeah.
going there and seeing it. And I was like, oh, okay. And that, but I didn't have any kind of repulsion about it. It was like, wow. And I could see, and I just felt,
Yeah.
oh, this is like really connecting to these real living
Yeah.
saints. And that, which I didn't know really, what even a saint was, growing up, we didn't really have
Yeah.
that talk, even though I lived in Santa Maria, which is named after Saint Mary,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't know. And our high school team was called the Santa Maria Saints.
Wow.
So,
Oh
yeah, it's
my.
funny. And I think back on it, I was like, okay, that was maybe a hint. It's like, hey, look, God's
Yeah.
whispering, right?
Yeah.
So I forget what the question was, but
Oh, if you had
yeah,
any.
looking back, the liturgy,
Yeah.
yeah, that
Mhm.
again was very different because I had gotten so at one point when I got to the point where I had just kind of quit going to church. I was like, okay, all rituals, are totally, unnecessary. It's
Yeah.
all pagan. Then I had learned, people that started, this is years back. I heard how the Catholic Church they're just, pagans, and it's just they're worshiping, idols. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't really, totally embrace that, but I remember hearing that and thinking, okay, well, I've never really gotten into the Catholic Church. I've been to some. My sister was
Yeah.
married in a Catholic church, so I mean, I have friends. I've gone to them,
Yeah.
and I thought, yeah, there's a lot of beauty there, but I thought, Pope, all that stuff. I just couldn't quite,
Yeah.
get into it, and especially some stuff I would see and hear.
Yeah.
But with the Orthodox Church, the biggest, I guess, just the questions was, what does it mean to really be a Christian? What
Yeah.
is the life? And so I got to the point where, the humility I think is the hardest virtue, and it's the most
Yeah.
important because I always had such pride. That's why I put that brochure down, because it's
Yeah.
here's how to have a real true life in Christ: is this believe and pray and just let God speak to you. That was kind of the
Yeah.
essence of it. You don't need to do anything
Yeah.
outward. All this
Mhm.
baptism and all these, rituals. They don't, that was my mindset.
Yeah.
And so it was like getting past that. It's like, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing. I have to just let me hear God, and then read and learn. Oh, you mean they've been doing this for all this time? It didn't just, when I was
Yeah.
learning, when I thought I was learning let's go back to the early church. I go, oh, you mean like Martin Luther and
Oh my. Oh my.
because I mean,
Yeah.
even if you go that far back, you're still actually looking at the presence of Christ and this veneration of Saint Mary's. Even if you went to Martin Luther,
Yeah.
let alone. And I even started going, saying, oh, look back at some of these early Christian mystics, which I did go back, St. John of the Cross, and a couple others that were pretty interesting.
Mhm.
But it's still, there was like, you're not going back far enough. Go back to the beginning, to the
Mhm.
apostles, of
Yeah.
course, which, okay, I read, Book of Acts, that's the apostles, and the epistles. But then it's like, okay, what happened after that? Then it's like I learned, my patron saint is Saint John the theologian.
Mhm.
And I learned that he, because even though it was in the Bible, I said, oh yeah, you mean Virgin Mary? Christ said, here, stay. This is your mother, this is your son, and she's gonna stay with him,
Mhm.
which obviously means, well, what about? Didn't he have any other? Were there any other brothers that she could have stayed with? No, you're
Yeah.
gonna stay with John because she has no other children
Yeah.
but me, Christ.
Yeah.
And now John, the apostle, you will take care of. And I remember I
Mhm.
always used to love the Gospel of St. John,
Mhm.
just even as a just Protestant. That was like, if you read that, that's all you need. In the beginning was the Word,
Yeah.
and John 3:16. If you just get
Yeah.
that, you're good to go.
Yeah. Oh my.
And the epistles, just love one another.
Yeah.
Which I still think that there's, I mean, he has a very divine, which is why he's called theologian. Just in the Book of Revelation. So
Mhm.
that's I don't know where I'm going. Just kind of based
No,
off
I think
my
everything
mind
you
here.
just talked about was very important. And so on your journey, was there any like really helpful books that kind of helped you in your journey that you connected with, or YouTube channels, or
Yeah,
what were the best resources when you were, besides going to your catechism class?
yeah, no, definitely the most important is the church itself and the
Yes.
classes there. But there was a couple books that I'd even looked at when I was learning about Christianity, and one of the first priests, he even mentioned the Didache,
Yeah.
which I had never heard of it. And he goes, read the Didache. And I ordered it, and I go, wait a minute, is this the whole thing? It's only like, he goes, yeah, that's the whole thing. And I read that, and that was, speaking of this early church, that was like one of the books written like in the first century.
Yeah.
And it talks about, the Trinity, the sign of the cross, the triple immersion, and just, how to pray and fast. And I was like, oh, and the bishops,
the Eucharist,
the word bishop and all that's in the letters, of St. Paul to Timothy, talks about a bishop and the presbyters and deacons and all that's in there. But, as Protestant, I didn't ever think that was really, that doesn't really apply. Oh yeah, that is the thing. And then St. Ignatius and all these words. So I'd say that was just like for somebody who doesn't even get the connection between the Bible and then the beginning of the Fathers Didache.
Yeah.
And then I got the Orthodox Study Bible.
Yes.
I mean, if it was going to be one book, I would tell a person, who's like this new or thinking about it, just get that, read it, the notes in it, and read some of the prefaces in there, because it gives you a lot of ways of, and even the fact that we have all these other books that are in there, the Septuagint. That this was the books that when Christ and then we're quoting the New Testament, they were quoting out of this version. The Septuagint. They mention, the Book of Enoch and Jubilees, and so those are a part of the early, the canons of the church. And even though we don't necessarily have to read every one of them and know every, detail of every book, especially through all the whole Old Testament, when we see it's all one big story, and we can see Christ in it, and especially from the mindset. That's the biggest thing, is shifting mindset. So that the Orthodox Study Bible helps do that. The Didache was a kind of just a link to the early church fathers. And then like the Orthodox prayer book, there's various versions of this. But they're looking at what are these prayers, which I used to think, you just pray, Jesus, just please help me do this or that. And I knew, the Lord's Prayer, which again is super important, which is the one that Jesus really says, pray like this. And so I always knew that was important. Even the Didache says, pray the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day. So it's like, even if you just did that, it's a starting point. But just a couple other quick books I recommend. Orthodoxy, Religion of the Future. It took me a while to get to learning about Father Seraphim Rose, because I had read some things on the internet that said, don't read those. Don't look at what he's saying. And it's like, oh, okay, I won't. I wasn't really needing to at the time, but then I was let me just see what he's actually saying. And then I read this and Soul After Death, Nihilism, and I read his life and works. And then I've been to Platina, the monastery that he founded several times. And there's a lot there. And it was very helpful because it talks about like a lot of the New Age and the different religions. And it talks about like UFOs and all kinds of different cults and stuff, which I've been into a lot of that stuff. So that was helpful.
It's very prophetic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of books. I like this a lot. The Acquisition of the Holy Spirit.
Oh yeah,
by Saint Seraphim, because he really gets into just taking things and just what's the focus of life. Acquire the Holy Spirit. And that's not like meaning go out and start speaking in tongues and that. Like no, this is Christ is manifesting. The Word through the Spirit, there's the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. They're all, and even when we do that prayer, Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, that's, we're really connecting directly with the Holy Spirit. It's like we say our Father, we're going directly, the Father, and then the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, the sinner. So it's like we're really embracing the Trinity with those prayers. And so I'd say if nothing else for somebody, reading, just starting out at least, get the Orthodox Study Bible, get a Christian Orthodox prayer book. There's a lot of stuff online.
Yeah, definitely.
I like. There's 1,000 websites. I like yours because you have a lot of different varieties. So, obviously, anyone who's watching this already knows you and Orthocast, and I like the fact that people like yourself, Jay Dyer, others, like that. The Royal Path.
Yeah, Royal Path.
Bring a lot of more in-depth things, and they're not everything's not for everybody.
Yeah,
definitely. If you're just starting some very simple, basic, really good ones. I like Orthodox Wisdom, who I know the
Yes.
person. He reads a lot of really good, like the Church Fathers and things like that. Father Spiriton Bailey, he has
Yes.
a wonderful, wonderful channel. Um, yeah, there's a lot of other ones. I mean, those would be some I would probably recommend almost to anybody. Is Father Spiriton Bailey, Patristic Nectar,
Yes.
Father Josiah Trenum. There's Trisagion Films. And they do a lot of these, like learning about the saints.
Yeah.
And so then on what I do, also just a couple of podcasts that I listen to just because it kind of gets my day started. Is one called Orthodox Daily Scriptures, and there's one called The Path. And those are just, I just kind of click them on in the morning because it just kind of gives me, like the Orthodox Daily Scriptures, it goes through the whole Bible in a year.
Oh, wow.
And they read different, sections
Yeah.
out of it. And it's from, brings from an Orthodox perspective just a little bit of commentary on them. The Path is kind of a similar thing. It's just a lot shorter. It's like a 5 minutes. And to me, it's just like kind of start my day. Just get, at least you're hearing something, because if you think about most of Christianity for the centuries, most of them really didn't read books. Most people were illiterate. So just hearing the scripture, that's what's good about the icons too, because you can just see, be surrounded by the beauty. I think it's, well, Dostoevsky said, "Beauty will save the world."
Yeah, I love that quote.
And just having that beauty around us, having icons, and that was one of the things I did early on too. Is I went to that at the cathedral there. There was a bookstore there, and I remember getting my first icons there.
Wow.
And I got a prayer rope.
Yeah.
Those are things I think for me. Just having that. Have an icon of the Virgin Mary and Jesus, and the kind of a Pantocrator icon, just as a starting point.
Yeah.
Now I've got a lot of different ones in my saint, patron saint, all these other saints, and I think that's just having them around, and having just that connection, and just seeing them every day, one way or the other. It's a reminder, we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses.
Exactly.
Even when we're in our own little rooms, God, the Holy Trinity, Jesus Christ, the Saint Mary, Mother of God, our patron saints, our guardian angels, and thousands of others, they're with us.
Exactly.
Even when we don't see them. There's stories of battles, like I think in the Old Testament, Elisha, where they're like going up against, these enemies, but when it says, like, look behind you now, and you see like thousands and thousands of these, warriors on angels and chariots that are, they're behind us, and
exactly.
Say, God's with you, who can be against you?
Exactly. Yeah, God's always with us. We have the saints, and yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. Like, just get some basic icons, Orthodox Study Bible, prayer book, the prayer rope. You don't need all of those, but it's just they're good. They're good to have when you're starting off to start getting, like, living out the Orthodox life. It's really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you start. That's one of the things I would just say too. Is there's so much depth. You
yes.
Keep going deeper, and there's so many different versions. Not versions of the church, because one church.
Yeah.
There's so many different parts of it for different people. Like if you're really interested in, like in art and symbology, you've got like Jonathan Peugeot and people like that. You like, popular culture and conspiracies, you got Jay Dyer, and you got like the debates and people, if you're more into that type of thing. Everybody's not into that.
Yeah.
So I don't think everyone should, you gotta watch this one or that one.
Yeah.
But I think fathers like Spiriton Bailey, Orthodox Wisdom, some of those, you're going to stick, your basic, here's the words of God and the fathers, in the scriptures from an Orthodox perspective, developing the part of that mindset that we'll call the phronema.
Yeah.
That's important, because it's like so easy to be, which I know I have still problem, but being very arrogant and thinking, oh, well, I already know all that. And, thinking, then one of the things I joke about, I say, I'm not young enough to know everything.
Yeah. There's so much to learn in the Orthodox Church. Like, the more I learn, the more I'm like, wow, I still have I know nothing. There's so much depth in every part. Like, everything has a meaning in the liturgy, and it's really amazing.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and that's the thing. I'm so grateful, thank God, that I've even lived through it, because I've been so close, just when I look back, sometimes my story of, especially the drug, sex, rock and roll, insane, I mean, life of crime. I mean, I literally was, a guy that, carried a gun and
Wow.
did, needles and drugs and heroin and, committed felonies,
Wow.
for many years of my life. I was in and out of drugs, rehabs. And
Mhm.
that was, my worst parts of my life. But even then, God still allowed me to survive it all,
Yeah.
to live, to work, as that,
Mhm.
being able to work for the county and the
Yeah.
state and the federal government. Believe it,
Yeah.
your tax dollars are work here. But, and I was
Yeah.
fortunate. I was being, I was an honorably discharged veteran. I've been able to help other veterans. And, I
Mhm.
actually worked in drug rehab for many years too. And I helped people there. So God helps us help other people, and I think that's the
Exactly.
church is a
Mhm.
place, it's a hospital for us all too. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
It's not just about all the rules, and the
Exactly.
legal issues. It's
Mhm.
like you come to God, and we're all, we all need healing too. So it's
Exactly.
easy sometimes to also judge people, say, oh, he's not doing it right, or this person,
Mhm.
they didn't make the sign of the cross right, or they didn't fast.
Yeah.
You know, and there's like this place in hell for all the people who put some cream in their coffee on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's just we all do the best we can with it, and we
Exactly.
just keep coming and
Yeah.
pray, and God help us.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy on me. That's where it all. It's
Yes.
that line of good and evils in the human heart.
Yeah.
That's where I have to keep my focus.
Exactly.
Return to that.
Yeah. Apply the medicine and therapy that the church gives us. But yeah, I think that's a perfect place to end it. This has been an amazing interview. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Maybe we can do another chat in a few months or something. But I really, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so very much, Kyle.
Yeah.
And I definitely encourage people to watch your channel. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
all the work you're doing, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thank you.